Independence Day.
That's supposed to be July 4th.
Is that an American thing?
It's an American thing. Yeah.
That's their like Canada Day.
It's like their Canada Day, yes.
It's like yeah, that's what I meant.
Hi, welcome to Enter the Bunker, where we launch you into thriving. Each week we talk about a different virtue that can be used as a building brick to build your own personal bunkers. We share personal stories, as well as tips and tricks to help you thrive instead of survive. So sit down, relax, and enter the bunker.
Hi. So, welcome everybody. Today is Independence Day.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yes. What does it take to be independent? We're going to talk about independence and what it means to you and why this is an important building brick in making you thrive in today's world.
So independence, self-reliance.
Self-reliance.
Making our own choices confidently without undue influence from others. Perceiving the truth with trust in our own discernment.
Correct.
All right, so we have a quote. We actually have a few quotes. Which one's your favorite out of those three?
I like the middle one.
Do you?
Yes. Yes.
I think I like the last one, but it's unknown, and I like to know who quotes are from, even though I don't know anybody, but like I never know who the quotes are from. The name might sound familiar to me, but
Okay.
yeah. Why do you like the second one?
Because I think it's true. I think a lot of people, when it comes to their independence.
What is it? I guess we should say that.
Yeah. So when it comes to people's independence, it's something that I would say is very scarce these days. Mm-hmm. Because truthfully, a lot of people have a tendency to want to conform to what others are doing and get validation from what others are doing,
right,
rather than actually making decisions for themselves. And the truth is that even as people, that's kind of like, it's almost like something we've learned through evolution as a sort of self-defense mechanism. So what happens is that as long as we stay with it's the same thing with animals too. As long as they stay with the herd,
yeah,
then there's safety in that.
Right.
Right. So as long as they're with the herd, they'll be okay. The problem is sometimes they go in the wrong direction and then you get in trouble, right?
You actually shared a meme the other, I don't know, it was probably a week or so ago. That reminds me of what you're saying. It was like right path, wrong path or something. It was a pathway.
Oh yes, I remember this meme now.
It kind of reminds me.
It was about critical thinking.
Right.
As a matter of fact, yes. And there was everybody who was like this huge crowd of people and they were all screaming and shouting at the people who were in the line for critical thinking while they were going on a different path. Yeah. Right. So, yeah. So independence largely is something that does provide safety for some people in terms of, independence is something that gives people strength, right, to be able to make decisions for themselves. Yeah. Whereas conformity, which is like the opposite of independence, has it so that people will actually follow along with what other people think and also what they're doing. So I've seen there's even like a video I might have shared with you before of this scientific study that shows how quickly people will conform to things, where it's just they put a bunch of people in a room. Only one of them is actually part of the experiment. The rest of them are actually in on the experiment, and then they'll just point at different lines on the chart and just say, is this, which one is the longest chart? Which one is the longest line on the chart? And then it would start off with the first guy giving the correct answer. Then the next guy who's actually in the experiment gives the correct answer. And then the next guy. And then what happens is that it just seems normal to him, like, okay, we're doing this correctly. Mm-hmm. But then in the next experiment, they have the others answer first, and instead of giving the correct answer, they give the wrong answer. And to the guy who's in there, he's just like, it looks obvious to him it's the wrong answer. And at first he tells the right answer, but he feels really awkward. What ends up happening is that really quickly, as soon as the others started giving the wrong answer, he started giving the wrong answer.
Right.
Right. And so there's like all kinds of illustrations of this, like from 1984 and things like that, where they would torture people to be like, 2 + 2 = 5, and you'd have to they would just keep at them until they would say, yes, 2 + 2 = 5. Right.
Even though they know it's not.
Even though they know it's not. It's all about conformity, right? And the safety of of giving up your independence for acknowledgement and for validation from somebody else, right? So this is something that it's like when it comes to conformity, it's kind of a self-defense mechanism in terms of going with the herd. But independence makes it so that you really stand out. It makes it so that you are actually making decisions for yourself that are based on what you know is true, right? So the truth is that we all
what you know is true or what you think is true? Is that a good question to ask?
So what you know is true and what you think is true is basically your perception of truth, right?
So you're being independent either way, though.
Either way.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So if you don't have that, you made me lose my charge. So you're acting on what's your perception of truth, right?
Yes.
So, and the fact is that everybody comes from different backgrounds. They're all operating from very different information. So like somebody who is making certain decisions, they're making that because their perception of truth has all kinds of life experiences, all kinds of like things they might have learned in school, things that they've had experiences with other people. Just all these things end up creating their truth, right? And so acting on that, it takes a certain amount of courage, because a lot of people today tend to want to validate themselves against what other people think. And it ends up almost perverting their truth with someone else accepting their truth. Meanwhile, that other person hasn't had the same experiences, doesn't have the same education, doesn't have the same type of things that makes up your own truth, right? And so as soon as you give that up to somebody else, what happens is you've just given up your ability to actually thrive, like your ability to shine, your ability to grow. Because you will never get beyond where that other person is. Because like the crab trap I've talked about a few times in the past, is that they'll just keep on clawing you back to their reality, right? So whenever it comes to what you perceive as the truth and trust in that, you got to stand by it, and you have to have independence in it. There's actually another meme that I recently shared.
I think I might have been thinking of this one too, but go on.
So it takes nothing. Let's see if I can get it right. It takes nothing to follow the crowd. It takes everything to stand alone. Yes. And that's what independence is all about, is taking everything to stand alone when nobody else will. Right. And that comes right back to you standing by what's true.
So your favorite quote here was, "Independence is for the very few. It is a privilege of the strong."
Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yes. That was your favorite quote.
That was my favorite, because I do believe that it's
what
something.
You just talked about. It pretty much.
Yeah.
Just takes that quote and. Blows it up.
Exactly. So I think that for people who are able to demonstrate independence, that is a sign. That is a key sign of strength, and you either have it or you don't. And the only way you can have it, though, is if you practice it. Right? And you're going to get outside of your comfort zone every time you do it, right? There's that comfort zone where you just want to be just like, and that's where you conform, right? It's comfortable to just go with the crowd and just, everyone else is doing this, so this is what I'm going to do, right? And it's like, I'll be nice and accepted if I say there. Yes, this is comfy. As soon as you step outside of that, it's like suddenly it's like, you've just committed a sin. You're not doing what we're doing. So that's when you start to get out of that comfort zone, and now you have to be strong. You have to stand by what you know is true. And if you're not doing, and if you don't have real conviction to do that, then you can fold and you can just scurry right back into that little comfort zone. Right. Yeah.
So my favorite quote on here, and I'm already like, just by what you're talking and independence and everything, it has me a little emotional. You're looking at me, I could tell you could tell. My favorite one was, "The hardest walk is walking alone, but it is also the walk that makes you the strongest." So that's from Unknown. That's my favorite, only because I've always mentioned I've been through a lot in the last couple of years, but independence is one of the building bricks for sure that probably I've had to practice the most. I haven't had to walk it completely alone, but as a parent, I have. And I've had my kids, so that's what I mean. It's not completely alone. I've had them and stuff, but it's not quite the same. But yeah, it's a lot of stuff that has come my way. I've always was doing it with somebody, and now that just completely, it's not there anymore, and I've had to build, and it's been hard, like doing everything on your own. It's hard, but you learn as you go. And now when, for instance, trying to put up curtain rods and Dad's like, oh, you need my help. And I'm like, no, I don't. I got this. So I try to do it. And I told him, I'm like, well, it didn't work out as planned and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah, well, I told you so. You should have let me help you. And I'm like, that's not the point. Like, I will learn from being strong and being independent. And if it doesn't go the right way, then at least I learn and I won't do it again. Like, I won't make the mistake again, or I won't do that again. So you learn a lot being independent too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's my favorite quote of them.
Okay.
Got all like sweaty and cry there for a minute though. Yeah.
And so the other quote though is, independence isn't doing your own thing, it's doing the right thing on your own. On your own. Yeah, I screwed up the quote. Let's do it again.
Yeah, do it again.
Independence. So the other quote was, independence isn't doing your own thing, it's doing the right thing on your own.
Right.
Which was by Kim John Payne.
I don't know him.
I don't either. But clearly they got quoted, so.
Yeah, must be good. Yeah, so that's kind of, I don't know how to, independence isn't doing your own thing, it's doing the right thing on your own. So yeah, like just because you don't think that.
Don't expect anyone to give you a parade.
Yeah.
When you are doing what you think is right.
Right, because that might not be the majority.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly.
So you just need to understand that it's not necessarily about your own thing, but it's knowing what's right and standing by that, right? And again, like it comes down to what your truth is and your ability to take in that truth and trust it, right? Because a lot of people, they may come to a conclusion that is completely different from what everybody else is at, and or even where their family is at, or even their friends. And when they come to those kind of conclusions, and they need to be able to then step back and be like, I don't need validation from them. I know this is the truth. But what happens then is that even in that independence, oftentimes the desire is to bring everybody into your reality, right?
Right.
Try to create your own little herd, right?
And
the truth is, that's not how it works, right?
I honestly would rather not.
It's not only is that very difficult, but you have to understand that if you are able to come to that kind of truth for yourself, you need to honor other people's truth. Yes. You need to be able to allow them to be able to live in what they understand.
Exactly.
Right? And so if you can do that, then you can confer that onto them. And
respect
that way you're able to, then you're able to act with respect and be able to be kind and everything else, right?
Yeah.
So if you can't do that though, if you try to make it about manipulating them to come into your world, then it just falls apart. You're not acting in a way to thrive, right? You're being selfish, honestly, is by trying to manipulate everybody into your way of thinking.
Yeah.
Right? So you need to be able to let it go, trust in your truth, be independent with it, and stand strong with it.
Yeah.
And as long as you can do that, then everybody, number one, like some people are going to try to tear you down, right? And then others are going to respect you. Others are going to see that strength, and they're going to be like, "Whoa, like that's real." Like, and I'm going to respect that.
Yeah.
Right.
We've done openness in the past, and I feel like that building brick actually probably needs to come first before independence, because not necessarily, but for you to really thrive with independence, the openness part, like you're saying, you got to be able to respect and have kindness for other people's opinions. So that goes back to the openness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What if all your decisions were based on what others wanted and not what you wanted?
If they were based on what others wanted and not what I wanted, well, we would all be.
You wouldn't live a very happy life.
We would have the same clothes. We would all be eating the same food, and we would pretty much be living like animals.
Is that a bad thing?
It's a very bad thing, because we wouldn't have human spirit anymore.
I just had to be the advocate there.
Yeah, I mean,
the devil's advocate is what I meant to say.
Yeah, and the truth is that what happens, and I mean, like, okay, that's a very extreme case.
Yes.
Truth is, a lot of people live that way, where they do what others want. And sometimes, especially when it comes to relationships, a lot of times when it comes to women in relationships mostly, they will tend to give up what they want in the relationship in order to, be happy with the man they're with. And, and I'm being very stereotypical here, I understand, but truthfully, like that tends to be the role a lot of times.
Because we're more kind and heartfelt, that's why.
Yeah. And so, but then what happens is they end up not getting what they want, and they just, and they give up, and they give up, and they give up, and the next thing you know, it could be years, and then suddenly they're just like, my gosh, I'm nowhere in my life where I expected to be. I'm totally not happy, because after neglecting their independence for so long, they end up coming to a place where they're like, wow, this is, I'm not happy.
I have nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then now they have to actually start to get out of that comfort zone and step out and be like, yeah, no, I'm not going to be just living by what somebody else wants. I'm not going to be, I'm just giving an example. Like, I've always hated the color purple, but he says he likes purple, so I'm going to stop wearing purple. I don't know. Right. So there's just, you just end up being unhappy. And so, especially and I just gave the example of relationship, it happens with friends too.
Yeah.
Right. So you got a close friend and you always look for their approval. And then next thing you know, like you're asking them about your job, you're asking them about your decisions about relationships and all this kind of stuff. And friends do that. Right. So imagine.
How do you live your life like that?
How?
Yeah. Like, how would you live your own life when every decision you make is filtered through other people?
So you probably feel, you just never get strong.
Right.
It's the truth. You just stay weak. So that person, whoever they're talking to, 9 times out of 10, they might be they might mean well. They might really care about you, but they're not you, right? And so regardless of whatever great advice they might give, they still don't know your truth. And the longer you live in a place where you're relying on somebody else to give you that kind of input, the longer you just stay there, stay small.
Or go down further.
Never get strong. Yeah, and then you end up making decisions that take you further and further away from where you want to be, right? So you need to be able to really just, again, recognize your own truth. Take in all your truth and just, and actually trust in it, right? And that takes, for a lot of people, that takes walking by faith. Because the first steps are just in the total darkness. You can't see anything.
Yeah.
And
I can vouch for everything you're saying here.
Okay.
Yeah, like honestly, really, like it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were saying something about the first few steps.
So the truth is that
Just so intrigued listening.
every step you take when it comes to building that strength and independence means like walking in the dark.
Yes.
And you need to be, and just not knowing where you're going to go because you've stayed in that small comfort zone for so long, expecting somebody to tell you it's okay to do this, or, is what I'm doing, right? You give that up and you start trusting yourself, building that strength. The first steps are just totally in the dark and you don't know how it's going to go. So it's very scary. But again, you walk by faith, not by sight. Then you get out of that comfort zone, you start to make those steps. And the next thing you know, you're just like, wait a minute, like, I can do this, right? And those small steps lead to bigger steps. And then you can actually start to make bigger and bigger decisions. I'm suggesting that you need to start doing it by small decisions and then just build it up so that it becomes a change in your behavior.
Right. Do you think you can have independence in some parts of your life but not others? So for example, a friendship. So you have a group of friends and you're always like the one to make the decisions and you're kind of like I don't like to say leader of the friend group, but essentially, you're the one who makes the decisions, you're the one who usually has the final say, but then in your relationship, it's complete opposite. Like your relationship with your significant other.
Right.
So do you think you can have independence in one area, but not in the other? Not in another? Or is it fake in one side? Or just is your independence with so say the independence with the significant other really was crappy, you had no independence in the relationship, but then you did with your friends. So maybe once you get out of that relationship, it might be easier to build back your independence because you're used to being independent with the friend group. I don't know if what I'm saying is making sense, but you always seem to get it.
So I guess the fact that you do have that practice with your friends does help, because it's evidence that you do have a certain strength somewhere that you can exercise.
Yeah.
And then what comes down to having that kind of, but then having the same interaction inside of a relationship, I think that some of that might have come from, again, it comes back to your own truths, right? And so what happens is in that kind of scenario, if they're in a relationship and they have those kind of perceptions of like, oh, I should do this and do this to make them happy, kind of thing, then it just keeps you from being able to grow beyond that in terms of having a relationship where each of you do have a sense of independence, right? Instead, it's given up.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that in that kind of scenario, yes, if there's a situation where there's, kind of a, they're leader in the group, but then when they come to the relationship, they're not, and then that has to change. It does help to exercise it. It's like a baby step, but at the same time, if that was a situation with the relationship where it's not the same, that has a lot to do with what's called like a belief hierarchy. I don't know if I've ever used that term or not on the show. So belief hierarchy is basically what everybody operates on. Okay. So you value certain things, and there's a hierarchy of values, right? So if somebody puts having a relationship as like the most important thing above friends, then in that hierarchy, the relationship will always win, right? And they'll always end up getting all the attention, and the friends will be neglected. And this is just an example, right? Yeah. So, and then everybody has it when it has to do with their jobs, their families, their everything,
just
right?
Not just relationships with friends or significant others. It's everything, your job.
Yeah, and so this happens with everybody. There's a value hierarchy that everybody has. And so understanding people's value hierarchies are actually very useful in terms of helping to work with them in what's important to them, right? So I think that in this kind of scenario that you're describing, somebody in that situation, their value hierarchy probably put the relationship as something where, okay, I have to do everything and sacrifice everything possible to keep a relationship, right? But then once that is no longer serving everything else, well, now your value hierarchy is actually, now it's being challenged, right? Just how true is it, right? Because there's people have value hierarchies that are completely wrong. Like they're not going to make them happy. They're not serving their lives well. They're just causing everything to fall apart. So now they have to reassess it and to be like, okay, what. And then throughout their lives, you're constantly being challenged with what you value, right? So if what you're doing is, or what the person is doing is not actually serving them well for whatever makes them happy, then that value hierarchy gets challenged. Then what happens is that, yes, you end up getting to a point where you're not happy, you have to do something to change it. And now, once that happens though, now the relationship no longer is at the top, sacrificing the friends. And it switches, right? Or it evens out. Or it could go anywhere.
Yeah, as you're saying this, I've been told multiple times, is like, you're number one. So like you're number one to you. I'm number one to myself. And you need to look after yourself before you look after anybody else.
Right.
I had a very hard time with that. Well, that really comes down to independence. Like you need to look after yourself and you need to be independent for yourself before you can look after anybody else. So I had a hard time with that because I still don't think, but I always said my kids are like my number one.
Right. Yeah.
But then they're like, no, you're number one. Because I went to therapy and stuff like this after a crappy relationship. And they're like, no, you have to look after yourself first. And I'm just like, no, I still never agreed with it. And I was like, we're tied. We're tied for first place. Like that's the hierarchy, is me and then my kids.
Right.
Like both of us tied for first. And then job and friends can all come after that. But yeah, you need to be true to yourself at all times too.
Absolutely.
And that's what'll gain your independence.
Well, you need independence to be true to yourself.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Otherwise, you conform. Yes. And then you're not true to yourself and you start doing things that you never would have.
Right.
I can remember a time where I conformed. I've conformed many times.
Oh,
everybody does,
Everybody
right?
has, yes.
But there was this one time I did it it was so automatic. It was like,
It's easy.
No. This was a life or death situation when I was in Nigeria. So
is this the bus?
This is part of the bus.
Okay,
yeah. So
okay.
I was specifically.
Good story.
So everything had passed,
yeah.
and we went back to the checkpoint, and we got off the bus, and so all of us, there was like crowds of us in the middle of the night, like in the middle of nowhere, right? And so I'm standing there, I'm just like I stick out like a sore thumb. Okay, yeah. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
And so we're all standing around waiting to find out what's going to happen next. And we see the other bus that was ahead of us that got completely robbed with riddled with bullet holes and everything coming back.
Oh my God.
And so as we're standing there, suddenly, what happened? I think someone heard a vehicle or something. And then all of a sudden, the crowds of us that were there, people just started running towards a certain direction. I couldn't tell what was going on. Like, I couldn't see why they were running or what was going on, but I instinctively followed the herd,
of course,
and just started running with them, right? Because I didn't know, I was like, what's happening here? And it's like, I better start moving, And so instinctively, a lot of people socially act the same way, right?
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, I better not do that, so I better stay there, and then they start to follow what everyone else is doing, right? So was it
a good outcome?
It turned out nothing happened.
Okay,
people just ran for nothing, and it turned out actually it was the police that were showing up, and so they thought it might have been the bandits that had come back to finish us off, but it wasn't.
That is so scary.
So I remember that moment very well though, because I was just like, I just suddenly had this sense of like, I better start running with these guys, right? So that's an example of conformity and how it felt like it was safe, but my independence to think and assess the situation was gone. Like it had just got taken up by the crowd.
This reminds me of a story that you would tell when somebody, I think it was New York City or something, somebody just like stood in line for something. And they had no clue what they were. You tell the story.
It was so it was actually an experiment just to show how people conform.
Yeah. And
it took place in Vegas, right? And what they did was in the open square where there's all kinds of things happening, they literally just put up, they put a couple of posts in to make it look like a line.
Yeah.
And nobody was there, and there was literally nothing there. It was just in the center square.
Yeah.
So nobody had any idea what it was. And then and it took a while. Nothing happened for a while.
Yeah.
Finally, someone went and stood in the line, right?
Yeah.
Just one person.
Yeah.
And he didn't even know what he was there for. He didn't even know, right? But he was just like, he saw that there was a possibility for a line. So he just walked in there and thought, okay, this is going to be something. And then finally, somebody else got in line with him. It took a while.
Yeah.
And then somebody else got in line. But then once there was just a few people in that line, that line went all the way out.
Can you imagine?
Dozens and dozens of people all got in line. And guess what?
For nothing.
Nobody had a clue what it was for. Nobody knew.
It wasn't for anything.
It was for nothing.
Social experiment.
It was literally an experiment, right? So then they turned it into a whole thing where they ended up doing a conga line out of it and stuff, right?
At least they did something.
They did something with it, right? But the truth was that like they even went up to people and they're like, do you know what you're in line for? And they're like, no. And it's like, why'd you get in line, right? And they're just like, oh, look, like everybody else was here, like, again, it had to do with conformity, right? But if they were independent, like if they were actually to exercise their independence and have the strength to be like, what are you guys here for?
Yeah.
They might find out that everybody else didn't have a clue.
Right.
And then we're like, these guys are all crazy. Like, we're not going to waste our time here. Like, yeah, just imagine all the people in that experiment that wasted, it was well over a couple of hours.
I feel like I would have walked the line and been like, do you know what you're here for? Or why are you here? What's this line for? What's this line for? And if anybody knew, I'd be like, I don't know. I feel like but I might not have in the situation.
Yeah, well, these are total strangers, so a lot of people don't even want to have that conversation.
No, they don't.
Right?
No,
maybe Nova Scotians are a little more. Nova Scotians would be more likely to start a conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
But for sure.
Other parts of the world, that just doesn't happen.
Weird.
It's like there's lots of parts of the world where that just doesn't happen. And in this case, in Vegas, it wasn't happening because everyone in that line had no clue what was going on.
Right. Crazy.
So that's just an example of conformity, and where independence would have saved you from getting to a line to nowhere.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh. Can you imagine what the people would have thought of after? Like, I would have loved to know, like, their thoughts afterwards.
They were probably a little embarrassed, I imagine.
Yeah.
Because nobody...
Or, like, laughy. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just did that.
Oh yeah, they're in Vegas, so they're there to have it's a
exactly,
good time, and they're probably a little loopy, but
yeah. All right, so in the next episode, we will be talking about how to practice independence.
Yes, so you can strengthen that brick.
Woo, let's go.
Thank you for listening to Enter the Bunker. Make sure to follow us on Instagram where you can share your story and also look at behind the scenes of how we make our podcast. You can watch the video version of this podcast on YouTube by simply searching Enter the Bunker. Tune in next time as we launch into thriving.